Sir, the relay's dead. They didn't cut the feed. They erased the node. Lieutenant Cormvet's voice cut through the control deck like a blade, stripped of ceremony. The chamber was darkened not by design, but by disconnect. Panels, once active now, flickered between diagnostics and blank systems. Rows of delegates remained upright in their gallery seats above the diplomatic floor, unmoving, their postures feigning calm. Every eye flicked toward the central dais where Earth's ambassador stood, hands clasped, face frozen in a polite expression that had outlived its function. 3 hours earlier, Earth had joined the Pan-Stellar Concord. The footage had already looped a dozen times across Earth's broadcast grid. Ships docked in ceremonial orbit, Concord flags overlaying Terran emblems. Chancellor Droven lifting the treaty core toward the cameras in a rare bow. Words like parity and unity had echoed from polished lips. Applause had been mandatory, yet hollow. For the diplomats gathered at Orbital Assembly Station 4, the room had smelled of clean, recycled air, sterilized metals, and long-worn suits sealed too tightly for comfort. Sweat pooled in the fabric seams. Earth had been welcomed, but not embraced. No one on the human side expected warmth. That wasn't the purpose. Captain Rindalk sat behind the envoy row, flanked by 3 aides in dark stripe uniforms. His eyes were not on the ceremony. They were on the status feed from Terran Orbital Control, which had just gone blank. One system after another failing without warning or external breach. "They didn't disrupt our stream," Vet said again, stepping down from the comms gallery. "They deleted the uplink route." Delk stood, chair legs scraping the deck. "Reconfirm via hardline?" Vet nodded once. "Tried. Bounce backs from all Concord relays. Our packets aren't just delayed, they're being voided mid-transit." One of the aides leaned in, murmuring low, "Treaty's ink's not even dry." "It was never about ink," Dalk said, already moving. Below them, Ambassador Kelran Routh adjusted his collar, a reflex gesture to stall for time as his console updated with "Data error, diplomatic access revoked." The Concord moderator, some 6-limbed Darson with a ceremonial mantle and a polished exterior like wet stone, glanced over with what might have been polite confusion or predatory satisfaction. No motion. No explanation. "Commander Dross isn't here, is he?" Vet whispered. Wilkes's reply was flat. They made sure he wouldn't be. For the past year, Earth's inclusion into the Concord had been accelerated, unusually fast, according to veterans of the interstellar protocol circuit. Conditions had been clear. Complete disarmament of Terran orbital weapons, reassignment of fleet groups from defensive orbit to exploratory and scientific use, and binding non-militarization of border sectors. On the surface, it was a diplomatic masterstroke. Beneath it, Dalk had seen the framework of exposure. And now, just hours after integration, the Conqueror's claws were beginning to show. On-screen trade relays flickered red. One by one, Earth's approved commerce paths were marked as reassigned for system stability protocol. The phrasing was bureaucratic, surgical. Earth's outbound freighters were now diverted through staggered jumps that rerouted them across enemy-controlled gates. The math alone would bury their viability. Transit times had ballooned from days to weeks, while tariffs tripled. Trade collapse wasn't coming. I think it was already happening. Down below, the Concord moderator finally spoke. "A recalibration, minor. System flux during integration always yields variance. Adjustments will resolve within the cycle." Kelran didn't move. His jaw flexed once. "That's not variance. You've nullified our broadcast access and rerouted our commerce." The moderator smiled with the soft elasticity of something unfeeling. "No system remains untested. Welcome, Earth." Back on Earth, orbital logistics teams stared at screens that no longer pulsed with off-world transit data. Cargo ship Kestron Vale, en route to Virex 9, vanished from registry. Its last signal time-stamped 15 minutes after treaty ratification. Its transponder pinged from a shipyard belonging to a Concord Lynn contractor. The ship's crew included 5 non-military Terran engineers. Within another hour, an ambassadorial shuttle dispatched to the Rulon Triad disappeared mid-jump. When Earth requested telemetry, Concord's central system returned a transit node under arbitration flag. There was no arbitration process. There wasn't even a council hearing scheduled. The shuttle never reappeared. "This isn't a delay," said Director Hal Tharvin from Earth's Strategic Assembly, deep within the secure basement tier of Central Command. "They're not jamming us. They're pretending we're not there." The Concorde's betrayal didn't involve fleets. No warships entered Terran space. No weapons fired. No borders breached. The betrayal was cold, procedural, and built entirely on clauses that Earth had agreed to. That was the brilliance of it. They hadn't broken the rules. They'd written Earth out of the system using the rules Earth had just signed onto. And on every terminal, one image remained constant: the Concorde seal, rotating slowly on a blank interface. No links, no channels, no disputes to file. Earth's access had been revoked, not through war, through agreement. In the orbiting Terran command cruiser Veilspire, Admiral Drav Morn watched the shift occur in real time. "They've collapsed every major point of access," his operations officer muttered, fists clenched behind his console. "We handed them the knife, and they cut us before we sat down." Orn's hand hovered over the emergency uplinked authorization, but he paused. The directive for total communication lockdown had not yet come down. He'd seen conflict spiral from misread orders. This wasn't spiral. This was linear, controlled, intentional. "We need confirmation from Central," he said quietly. Confirmation never arrived. Instead, across the next 6 hours, all known diplomatic corridors were placed under review. All outbound diplomatic correspondence returned unread, and all military listening posts aboard Earth's outermost satellites were removed from the Concorde registry without notice. They didn't get disabled. They were scrubbed from existence on a systems level, erased, as if they never belonged there. On one screen inside Terran Central Command, a low-resolution security cam still blinked from Outpost Brel 7. It showed an empty hallway, lights dimmed, terminal lights frozen mid-sexus. The camera feed wasn't cut. It just no longer had permission to exist. Kelran Routh received his final message through an encrypted relay rerouted 3 times through old Solnet fallback nodes. Is a single line: "Stand down, let it happen, we need time." It was unsigned, but the encryption was dated years back, used only by one man: Halveth Dross. In the next 12 hours, Earth said nothing. It filed no protest, lodged no requests. It accepted every clause, every denial, every rerouted ship and disappeared shuttle. There was no broadcast, no retaliation, just a waiting silence. The Obsidian Gate hadn't moved in over a decade, docked, locked, sealed by Treaty Core codes that bound it in ceremonial shutdown. Its reactor had been powered down under mutual trust. But somewhere beneath the Pacific Security Archive, a forgotten subroutine initialized. Command Directive Icarus, Line 1. Authority transfer to Strategic Quiet Command. Do not announce activation. The betrayal had been calculated. The response, when it came, would never be quiet. The chamber was silent except for the coarse drag of synthetic paper across the tabletop. Chairman Arion Vaxt dropped the printed report in front of the assembly. It landed with a thud sharper than it should have been, echoing faintly off the tiered stone walls that had not hosted a full strategic assembly in almost 6 years. The room smelled like stored polymers and recirculated air left stagnant from disuse. Every official seated around the Crescent War table knew why they'd reconvened. They just didn't want to say it first. "You're holding proof," Vaxt said, voice dry. "So, say it." Across from him, Colonel Rune Davrek adjusted the sleeve of his unadorned field coat, sleeves creased not by fashion but repetition. He didn't look at the datapad, already memorized. 17 systems, Davrek said. Transit rerouted, ports redirected, diplomatic records scrubbed. No request logs, no dispute filings, no notifications. Each change occurred within an identical 3-minute operations window across Concord space. It's not failure, it's coordination. Ambassador Jern Evros, the economic liaison, shifted in his seat, irritation replacing his usual composure. 3 minutes is a window, not an attack profile. Devrek didn't blink. 3 minutes across 17 systems, identical timestamp pattern. Internal routing protocols match Earth-based constructs seeded into Concord firmware over the last decade. Those constructs are now black-holed. Traced nowhere. That's not noise. That's engineering. General Alrek Noor, his tone sandpaper rough and absent of formality, leaned forward, hands folded over knuckles worn down by decades of station briefings and orbital compliance reports. We handed them system keys and thanked them for the infrastructure support. They installed locks we never noticed. Now we're on the wrong side of them. The assembly's chamber lights dimmed slightly as the overhead status grid updated. A digital feed displayed neutral zone ports flickering offline. Cargo lanes rerouted without authorization. Entire diplomatic relays failed to ping. A moment later, everything restored. But under Concord-controlled routing, with Earth cut out entirely. Still no declaration, murmured Security Advisor Bryn Lore. They're not confronting us. They're pretending we've ceased to exist. Vaxt pressed 2 fingers to the table's interface pad, and a deep chamber authorization prompt bloomed across the tabletop. A recessed container hissed open beside his seat, revealing an opaque silver capsule the length of a forearm. Nobody moved. You're not serious, Evros said finally. I signed the integration with my seal, Vaxt replied without lifting his eyes. And the day I signed it, I was briefed on contingency fallback. This is that fallback. Colonel Davrik reached for the capsule, held it just under the internal scanner, and waited. 3 seconds later, the lid unlocked, revealing a thick black memory slab. No ports, no markings, only a tiny indent for an identity chip reader. Directive Icarus, Davrik said, sliding it toward Vaxt. Authored 90 years ago by Strategic Override Command. Designed for delayed execution only, in the event of strategic consensus betrayal. Evros scoffed. This isn't the Dark Sector War. We're not dusting off cold conflict ghosts just because trade rerouted. Vax didn't reroute. Vogt said, quiet but absolute. They deleted our line. Davrik didn't wait. He inserted the slab into the deep link cradle beneath the table. A narrow pulse of blue light scanned the device, and then the main display overhead shifted. The room went still as black text filled the council wall. Command Directive, Icarus. Condition, infiltrative blockade. Non-kinetic hostility. Primary response, covert infrastructure reclamation via embedded civilian protocols. Execution Commander, Halvith Dross, reinstated upon activation. You can't be serious, Evros repeated, now with visible discomfort. He hasn't been cleared for active status in 15 years. Nor exhaled hard through his nose. He was shelled for being 10 steps ahead of everyone. We need 15. The room's wall began cycling through redacted reports. Plans for system overrides, dormant scripts implanted in Concord shared tech, planet-bound utilities, shipboard OS layers, and logistics firmware Earth had provided as compliance stabilization support. Every segment tagged passive until invoked. Every one of them keyed to an authentication chain that now lit green across the board. Wrote this plan, Vaxt said, not blinking. We're not voting on its ethics. We're acknowledging its necessity. Lore straightened. Theta 6? Davrik nodded. Already notified. Tier 1 operators are en route to Command Installation Senvault 9. All black systems will shift to Earth Control command shells in staggered deployment phases. Civilian exposure risk is 0. And public awareness? Asked Noor. 0, Davrik said. This won't be loud. At least not yet. Back on Earth, inside a chamber sealed beneath 30 floors of submerged shielding, a single retinal scanner chirped once and granted access to a corridor marked only by faded numbers and deep-sealed security welds. The man standing before it had not worn a uniform in 16 years. Elfith Dross placed his palm on the reader. It hissed recognition. No speeches, no press conference. A screen inside the control vault lit as he stepped in. A half-dozen monitors ran diagnostics of off-world utilities. A small console displayed the status of dormant code chains. He entered the 4-character trigger sequence manually, each press deliberate. 7. The screen blinked once, the first protocol executed. Back in orbit, a long dormant transponder activated inside an abandoned station husk once used for early Concorde shipping route optimization. The beacon transmitted no words, just a data structure. Inside it, Line 1 of Icarus. Do not seek approval. Completion is its own clearance. At Theta 6 barracks, operatives were issued black envelopes, real paper, no digital transmissions. Every order was hard-coded, hand-delivered, then destroyed. Each mission was assigned with full discretion to commanders in the field. Their targets: soft infrastructure, buried control systems, navigation anchor overrides. Not a single physical site would be touched. Not yet. The world thought Earth was paralyzed. The Concorde saw only stillness. And that was the final error in their calculations. Back in the assembly chamber, the room had cleared. Vax stood alone by the central table, reading over the final clause of Directive Icarus. Compliance with betrayal is not neutrality, it is surrender. Earth will not surrender. He pressed his thumb to the confirmation pad. The seal burned red. Command Directive Icarus had risen. Earth would remain silent, for now. But it would no longer be still. The freighter Rulon's mark veered 7 degrees off its assigned course without pilot input. Its nav path flickered briefly, recalculated, then fed the vessel into a corridor flagged for decommissioning due to unstable gravitational drift. By the time onboard guidance detected the reroute, the artificial gravity destabilized. Cargo crates snapped from their restraints, crashing into bulkheads with a heavy jolt that threw crewmen into rails. The emergency navlock refused override. "We didn't plot this jump," shouted the helmsman, blinking sweat from his brow as his hand slapped at the frozen console. "Route markers burned. It's rerouted upstream. I can't trace the source." The captain shoved past a collapsing rail support, boots slamming into the grating. "Backtrace it to source node manually. Get me the last valid signature." They never found one. 14 similar incidents hit Concorde logistics lanes within the next 90 minutes. None involved weapons, none drew blood. But every freighter veered, every corridor fractured, none returned on time. And all shared a common anomaly. Navigation modules failed simultaneously in staggered intervals, their course correction logs wiped and replaced with invalid checksum entries. In the Theta 6 Shadow Relay Hub, a former mining depot buried under Saturn's 6th moon, Operative Cauldron Vor unlocked a storage panel marked Water Filtration Equipment and removed a hard case no larger than a lunch ration. He opened it on the floor beneath the comms node. Inside was a single drive with a narrow green indicator and no ports. "Phase 2 confirmed," he said into his collar mic, voice dry. "Deploying loop cascades across Concorde-regulated drone lanes." A faint whir signaled deployment. Back in orbit around the Yaret core colony, an autonomous hauler en route to deliver agricultural stabilizers activated a retrothruster 2 seconds earlier than scheduled. That change tilted its entry vector by under a fraction of a degree, but the misalignment caused its outer hull to clip the colony's shield aperture, tearing through 2 decks, killing no one, but shutting down atmospheric regulators for 5 square kilometers of crop. 4 days of oxygen loss, 700 tons of food waste. The Concorde's response was bureaucratic. They dispatched a maintenance crew, ran system diagnostics, and issued a statement suggesting pilot negligence. The pilot in question had been sleeping when the incident occurred. His onboard autopilot had logged no manual interference. Earth issued no comment. At the Concorde's Central Regulation Assembly, High Operator Tavvek Jarn slammed both hands into the table's control surface. His skin shifted hue, an automatic adrenal response of his species. Veins on his neck swelled visibly. 3 planetary correction failures. 14 navigational anomalies. 8 colony-grade balancer resets. And you're still calling this environmental fluctuation? Beside him, protocol analyst Varesh blinked with oily discomfort. Sir, we've cross-checked all jump nodes. There's no indication of external manipulation. Jarn spun toward the wall display and jabbed one gnarled finger at the flashing zones. 17 failures, spread across 12 sectors, every one tied to infrastructure Earth provided. I want it stripped, disassembled, and rebuilt. We'd need emergency override from the Trade Compact to legally dismantle Concord-certified platforms, Varesh said. Yarn stepped forward until his shadow crossed Varash's hands. Then submit the override. If they reject it, I'll trigger it unilaterally. At Earth's Deep Core Monitoring Center, codenamed Blackseat Zero, Commander Halvith Dross leaned over a recessed projection table. The holographics had been stripped. He preferred direct LED feeds, embedded into the console through hardwired channels. No wireless transmission, no external data points. His voice remained unreadable. Are any of our markers still live in Rutan's reach? Yes, Commander, said Intelligence Specialist Brell. Local Concord Hub is still routing core system data through our sanitation relay shell. We have trace access to 2-level logic triggers. They haven't noticed. Dross nodded. Collapse their scheduling array. No visuals. Delay transit approval by 6 planetary rotations. Do it in 4-second disruptions, then stabilize. Rel hesitated. They'll think it's a hardware buffer issue. They won't think, Dross replied. They'll react. A silence followed, not awkward, but deliberate. Dross spoke again, eyes fixed on the screen where 24 yellow sectors flickered, one by one, into crimson. BB counted on our anger. That's not what we're giving them. On the Concord colony of Brawl S4, atmospheric control panels began displaying inversion data for polar jet streams. The system attempted to compensate, and briefly it worked. Then coolant distribution lines overreacted, flooding vapor into heat exchangers, killing circulation for the hydroponic climate zones. The colony's primary food towers began frosting over, not melting, as ambient regulators scrambled to reverse load data from backup arrays now looping the same 2 kilobytes, endlessly. Where are we stuck in diagnostic replay? Demanded the engineer as Frost climbed the walls. We're not stuck, muttered his assistant, staring at a screen that now displayed a code tag that had no known syntax registry. We've been overridden. The code in question bore no aggressive markers. It wasn't malware. It mimicked system protocols too cleanly. It had simply replaced the expected functions with slightly altered behaviors, like subtly turning a steering wheel until the car drifted off the road. Except here, the car was a functioning biosphere. On Theta 6's secondary deployment circuit, Operative Leron Storn crouched beneath the hull of a diplomatic-grade merchant ship moored in the outer belt. With quiet precision, he removed an inspection plate labeled Routine Waste Heat Diffusion and swapped the processing board with a wafer-thin insert wrapped in neutral gel. It made no sound. When asked hours later, the crew would report that everything seemed normal until route authorization failed and their path rerouted to an illegal orbit. No one traced the swap. Inside Concord's internal reports, the phrase, unexplained routing anomaly, began appearing so frequently that analysts created an automatic subfolder for it. The senior Concord software engineer overseeing systems coherence, Director Halvir Kores, wiped his face with a sleeve, then reviewed another 96 flagged events. Every one bore minor failure characteristics, not one had a common source. They're not hitting us, he whispered. They're letting us hit ourselves. At Blackseat Zero, Dross received the full playback of that recording. He tapped it off mid-sentence and stared at the timestamp. They'll notice the pattern soon, said Brell. No, Dross answered. They'll invent a new pattern to believe in. Shall we initiate Phase 3? Dross folded his arms behind his back. Not yet. Let them finish breaking what we've already ruined. The Concord thought they had silenced Earth. They had no idea that every system running smoothly was already compromised. Earth had not declared war. Earth had written the system in which war would no longer need to be declared. And one by one, without firing a weapon, the Concorde's spine began to bend. Firewall's not just compromised, it's rewriting itself. Chief Architect Jarek Thal jabbed a stubby finger at the looping feed, where a blue sector override command was executing in real time. None of his inputs registered. The logic console blinked in sync with commands that no one in the Concord Council had authorized. Each instruction looked valid, even familiar, until they traced the authentication chain back to a root key embedded decades earlier. Registered under routine infrastructure support, human data index. I want every node decoupled manually, Jarek barked. His second-in-command stared back, rigid. We've already pulled 8. 5 of them began purging internal memory on disconnection. 2 wiped their audit trails entirely. The last one bricked every physical sensor tied to atmospheric regulation. That colony's now blind. Jarek turned slowly, face drawn tight with pressure and heat. The command bunker reeked of coolant leaks and polymer insulation warped under thermal overdrive. Panels hissed and buzzed as circuits throttled against hard resets. A faint, high-pitched whine bled from every corner. Not mechanical, computational. What the hell is running, he asked. No idea, came the reply, but it's following our patch rollouts like it predicted we'd do this. In orbit over Siran Prime, a Concorde heavy repair ship latched onto the main orbital elevator cable to stabilize the cargo spine during a planetary energy relay sync. The ship received the correct interface handshake. 2 minutes later, its anchor clamps reversed polarity and initiated a rapid tension test, directly against the cable's structural flex limit. 4 kilometers of tether snapped with the force of a tectonic plate shift. The cargo spine didn't just drop. It twisted mid-descent, crushing 16 satellite rings before vaporizing on planetary impact. The Concorde called it unforeseen equipment degradation. Privately, internal command channels reported command injection from a dormant maintenance file last edited by a Terran civilian subcontractor 17 years prior. In the Concorde's emergency strategic alignment complex, 12 species argued simultaneously, each yelling over their translators. One pounded the table, another flared its facial membranes in distress. Several showed open hostility. There's no Earth signal in the net, shouted the Kareth envoy. You're trying to assign blame for your own failed integration protocols. Our platforms were functioning until your shared diagnostic package distributed a logic loop across interdependent thermal routers, retorted the Galtharian representative. You signed off on those packages, snapped a human-formed diplomat. You ran them across every regulated colony to cut costs. A hollow chart behind them pulsed as another 5 systems dropped to manual fallback. At Black Seat 0, Dross reviewed the collapse feed without changing expression. He stood behind a steel mesh panel observing a secure server room where new key injections ran silently across hardened drives. Operative Laron Storn entered with a dry datapad, eyes tired, shoulders rigid. Concorde's backup recovery teams are deploying anti-cascade scripts. They don't realize every one of their countermeasures completes the circuit. Let them patch, Dross replied. The faster they move, the deeper they sink. In orbit above Riven's crown, a Concorde food distribution vessel rerouted itself mid-orbit after receiving a non-existent emergency beacon. Its sensors registered a failed planetary irrigation system requesting immediate nutritional supplement drop. When the cargo bay opened, it ejected 400 tons of high-nutrient grain over a dry ocean shelf, now a breeding ground for corrosion bacteria. The bacteria bloomed instantly, spread into water conduits, and rendered them toxic within minutes. By the time ground control realized the drop was fabricated, the bacterial strain had entered 3 separate supply lines. Back in the Concord Senate Hall, a media diplomat demanded a public explanation. Her broadcast was cut mid-transmission. She tried again, using diplomatic clearance from her species' sovereign code. The signal redirected. Not to a firewall, but to a voided transmission pool, a catch bin for illegal advertisements. Her image broadcast into nothing. Her words reached no one. In the Southern Communications Wing, A data tech tore off his headset and threw it across the floor. They're not disabling our systems, they're in them, watching us try to fix it. Chief Systems Auditor Delphin Mech stared at the server racks, blinking inconsistently. The rack to his right suddenly emitted a shrill series of error tones, then fell completely dark. Seconds later, the adjacent system lit up, only with gibberish inputs scrolling across in broken Terran syntax. He ran diagnostics. The results returned valid. The data it claimed to be parsing didn't exist. Back on Earth, in a subterranean war room lit by narrow utility floods and powered by isolated energy cells, Specialist Van Thur set down a portable console and wiped his hands against his fatigues. His face showed none of the satisfaction others might feel. This wasn't triumph. This was function. We're getting pullback from Concord engineers. They're reverting to standalone protocols. That's when it breaks, Dross said flatly. All their fixes operate on trust. None of them understand consequence. Beta 6 had implanted the scaffolds years before during cooperation missions. Human tech firms had offered optimization services, firmware upgrades, environmental modeling kits. Nothing invasive, everything useful. Over time, the Concord systems weren't just upgraded by humans. They began to depend on those upgrades. Now, with Earth revoked from access, those same systems began to collapse under the weight of their own dead code. Triggered not by intrusion but by separation. Pull the command shell from the Jaston array, Dross ordered. Stage 5 begins when the next override attempt hits. A monitor to his left blinked with the exact timing he predicted. We're live. In Concord's central relay vault, engineers watched in stunned silence as one override loop activated 200 self-deletion commands across emergency fallback servers. They stared as firewall threads peeled away like scorched insulation, revealing nothing underneath. The code had never been secure. It had only looked complete. One engineer whispered, "It was always them, even when we thought we built it ourselves." Back at Black Seat Zero, the final relay initiated. Earth's silence hadn't been surrender. It had been countdown. Docking clamps engaged. We are now aboard the Obsidian Gate. Envoy Velen Makar's voice carried the brittle edge of forced control. His left eye twitched once as the vessel's internal lighting recalibrated to match Earth-standard luminance. The ship greeted them with silence. No honor guard, no escorts, just air thick with recycled moisture and the faint tang of chemical shielding still lingering in the bulkheads. The delegation walked in formation, Makar leading, with advisor Heshar trailing behind, fingers twitching at the edge of his robe with every echoing footstep. The last of them, Director Calveth of the Concord Trade Tribal, wore no insignia. He hadn't spoken since they passed the docking port, jaw locked, shoulders rigid. The corridor ahead curved without signage, marked only by a narrow strip of red light running along the floor. It led them to a chamber with a single central table made of dull, matte alloy and surrounded by 6 seats. 5 vacant. Only one was occupied. Commander Halvith Dross sat with his hands resting flat against the table, unmoving, spine aligned, eyes fixed. The room was dim, but his silhouette cut clear. Still, unyielding, unwelcoming. Makar cleared his throat and stepped forward. "We're not here to perform ceremony. We came to—" "Sit," Droz said, without adjusting his tone or posture. Makar hesitated, then obeyed. The others followed. No one spoke again for 20 seconds. Then Dross reached for a thin control slate embedded into the table. With one tap, a screen lit behind him, not with visuals, but logs. Audio files auto-paid in sequence. Terran sectors are fragile. Remove trade, deny orbitals, watch them fracture internally. Another voice followed. Their economic layer is too young. No need for confrontation, just isolation. Let them implode on schedule. The voices were familiar. Senior Concord strategists, archived from secured internal channels. The room remained motionless as the files played, each statement stripped away the illusion of partnership, each word a knife pressed into diplomatic pretense. When the audio cut, Dross finally moved. He slid a small projection node toward the center of the table. A hologram lit above it, Earth's emblem, rotating slowly. The outer ring glowed a dull red. 40%, Dross said, eyes flat. That's the portion of Directive Icarus currently engaged. Makar leaned forward. You're telling me you've only activated less than half? Dross answered with silence. Calveth shifted uneasily. We are not enemies, Commander. What happened? What is happening can be reversed. Your systems, your protocols. We came to discuss pathways to mutual repair. Dross leaned back. You locked out our ships. You redirected our civilians to hostile ports. You erased our diplomats from your registries and cut our broadcasts without declaration. You intended to dismantle Earth in increments. Not through invasion, but erosion. We were responding to instability. Heshar snapped. Your tech was unstable, your influence spreading too quickly through key infrastructures. We saw risk. You used that risk to justify betrayal, Dross said. And you did it without ever calling it war. Which is why we haven't responded with war. Calveth swallowed hard, voice cracking, then, What do you call this? Dross stood slowly. A correction. The table lit again, this time showing a command tree expanding in nested rows. Each file bore the watermark of Earth's infrastructure support contracts, signed by Concord leadership over a 25-year span. The contracts had authorized Earth's logistical tech into their food networks, orbital systems, environmental controls. Nothing hidden, everything signed. We didn't hack your systems, Dross continued. You built them on our architecture. You made yourselves dependent, then decided you didn't like who you were leaning on. Makar's voice faltered. You could have raised this through formal channels. We did, Dross replied. You didn't just ignore it. You purged the records. Silence hung for another stretch. Ashar tried again, but the words came strained. What do you want now? Cessation? A treaty? Code rollback? We are willing to establish a shared framework. No, Dross cut in. You don't get to ask for structure. Not after you burned the map and handed us the matches. What you want isn't relevant. Calveth finally stood, breath shaking. This is revenge, then. Reprisal. Dross turned to face him directly. Revenge would have meant destruction. We haven't destroyed anything. You're doing that yourself. We gave you systems that required trust. You broke it. Now, you live with what's left. Behind them, the room's secondary panel lit for the first time, displaying real-time telemetry from Conquer's fleet flagship, Austran Val. Red flashes pulsed across its heads-up display. Power balancing inconsistencies, route interruptions, auxiliary failure warnings. One sequence showed a complete recycling of emergency oxygen generators on Deck 3, all running Earth-issued firmware, all failing in sequence. Calveth's mouth opened, then closed again. Makar broke the stare. What happens if you go past 40%? Dross answered immediately. You'll never ask that question again. The red projection faded, the table returned to black. We're prepared to meet terms, Makar said, more careful now. Offer concessions, acknowledgement of breaches, diplomatic reinstatement, resource reparations. Dross lowered his hands back to the table. You think this is a negotiation? If it isn't, then what is it? Hashar said, half rising. Dross didn't blink. It's a demonstration. Makar straightened. Of power. No, Dross said, standing again. Of ownership. He turned toward the exit. Earth doesn't negotiate with systems already claimed. The delegation remained seated, watching the corridor seal behind him. Outside, the obsidian gate's exterior lights flared once, brief, surgical. A signal transmitted through a direct pulse band. No broadcast, no interference. Just a quiet instruction embedded into the layer Conquered fleets used for emergency maintenance logs. Across 8 active ships, red starburst warnings appeared on command interfaces. No alarms triggered. No systems failed. But every officer on every deck froze when they saw the same image reflected on their panels. Earth's flag, projected quietly in the corner. No text. No explanation. Just presence. The Concorde Assembly Hall echoed with the sound of furniture being dragged across polished tile. Not ceremonial movement, evacuation. Delegates once seated by planetary seniority were now flanked by guards, advisors, and silent exit plans. Formal documents lay scattered across the chamber floor, some half-burned by emergency sanitizers, others crumpled and ignored. At the center podium, the speaking light blinked unanswered for 34 minutes. No one approached. Across the main concourse, screens displayed status overlays, emergency resolutions queued for a vote, none ratified. The system chair had been vacant since the third failed election attempt. Every nominee either declined the position or vanished before the vote. One was reportedly placed in isolation by his own species under suspicion of code proximity compromise. Planetary representatives from the Solvin Triad left first. Their withdrawal message was short. Retraction pending safety of homeworld infrastructure. The Concorde's standard protocol dictated a 10-day processing window for withdrawal. They exited in 12 hours. Following them, the Vel Syndicate enacted full economic quarantine. Cargo was recalled mid-jump, trade agreements revoked without review, and relay gates rerouted under closed authority. The Syndicate had once profited most from Terran subcontracts. Now they feared that every shared routing packet carried embedded failsafe logic tied to Earth's dormant assets. Concorde Command attempted a stabilizing broadcast, but the screen feed stalled. The delegate leading the address froze mid-statement, face contorted in hesitation as the cue signal vanished from the teleprompt system. The audio resumed 10 seconds later, looped back to the phrase, "unified under cooperative transparency," before crashing to black. In private, Admiral Sarkenjal of the Othari sector placed a secure call to the Ardan Banking League, a move strictly prohibited under Concorde Unity law. He requested discrete holding patterns for emergency treasury reserves. "We're not declaring independence," he said into the encrypted line. "We're just insulating against total collapse." "We've already done the same," the banker replied without hesitation. On the Telisari border station, a fleet of Concorde civilian transports floated listless. Their return codes to dock with central control had been revoked. The control tower operators claimed system recalibration, but none of the inbound crews received timeline updates. One pilot watched the readout flicker endlessly. A second vessel drifted past, its beacon dark. Communications officer Garin Len leaned back in his seat and muttered to no one in particular. "We're being kept in orbit so we don't infect the ground." Two of the ships turned back toward independent colonies without permission. Inside the Intelligence Coordination Hub, Operative Sin Varsh of the Concorde's Data Command observed logs of Earth's Obsidian Gate. Still docked, still powered, still silent. The silence was worse than a threat. It gave nothing to refute. Varsh turned to his team. "Has there been a single data emission?" "Only the standard beacon from their cruiser," the analyst replied. Repeating, unchanging, no updates, no outreach. "What's the payload?" The analyst didn't speak at first. Then, reluctantly, "A checksum verification. That's it. Just a system readiness packet. Signed with a Terran command key. Authenticated by our own trust chain." Varsh closed the report, stood, and said, "Send a warning to all sectors still connected to Concorde CivilNet. Any attempt to overwrite Terran structure is to be considered a direct sabotage risk." No one objected. In the Western Hall, the Gararun delegation aired a public address, condemning foreign psychological contamination and formally accused Earth of engaging in passive warfare. Seconds after their declaration, a series of their own internal vote records leaked anonymously to every Concorde public server. The files showed Garun delegates had, for 6 cycles, lobbied for economic partitioning of Earth's orbitals. The release timestamp traced back to a secure Earth diplomatic archive. The Council never confirmed if Earth sent the leak. They didn't need to. As more sectors began sealing their planetary cores from shared systems, the flow of information fractured. Civilian supply channels, once automated through Concord Logistic Command, were now managed locally. That shift introduced bottlenecks, food shortfalls, delayed medical shipments. Entire quarantine units were now rationed manually by species unaccustomed to doing so. No Terran forces arrived, no message came. But the collapse pressed on. In a side room of the assembly tower, 3 planetary blocks attempted to form an interim oversight committee. Their first meeting lasted 12 minutes. The Dorthan representative accused the Talmar envoy of concealing data streams. The Talmar envoy denied it. The Eric's official suggested inviting Earth to mediate. All 3 left the room. Some tried to approach Earth informally. The colony world of Vinlara sent a single ship bearing no flags. It reached lunar orbit, issued a handshake signal, and received a non-hostile acknowledgement code. No verbal contact, no demands. The ship returned, message unchanged. Acknowledged. This non-response was interpreted as a threshold, an indicator that Earth was open to relations, but unwilling to speak first. It was not hope, it was measurement. Across Concord space, news feeds lost focus. Stations rebranded themselves as sector local priority channels. Maps no longer bore the full Concord insignia. They split into fractured grids, territory lines redrawn unofficially. Merchants no longer asked for Unity certificates, they requested route permissions from responsible local authorities. In a final broadcast from the original Concord Archive Center, a historian attempted to catalog the organization's dissolution. He spoke calmly into a live feed. History will not mark Earth's return by battles or fleets. It will mark it by erasure. The systems that betrayed Earth tried to pretend it was no longer a partner. Earth replied by letting us forget how to function. The feed dropped mid-sentence. Back at Earth, no action was taken. No fleets deployed. No delegations summoned. Inside Black Seat Zero, Dross received the latest update. 3 more systems disconnected voluntarily. He folded the datapad closed. We never had to destroy them, he said aloud. We only had to let them remember who built the foundation. The Concord had never declared a formal end to its treaty with Earth. But Earth had made the Concord irrelevant. And without relevance, there was no seat left to hold. Obsidian Gate held position over the neutral drift zone between Earth's autonomous command boundary and what remained of Concord-registered territory. The ship did not move. It emitted no acceleration signals, conducted no patrols, issued no secondary pings. Its presence alone altered trade navigation grids across 13 sectors. From the surface of Kevrith Station, the silhouette of the vessel was visible at orbital zenith. Black structure framed by cold starlight, hull plates coated in non-reflective shielding, lined in deep grooves, built for deterrent launch. None had opened. None needed to. Concord merchants rerouted routes overnight, citing risk uncertainty. Pilots began consulting civilian-run proximity charts, each marked with concentric rings color-coded not for legal compliance but for comfort. The red band around the Obsidian Gate spanned 20,000 kilometers. Its only transmission played on a narrow civilian guess frequency, uncoded, unchanged, uninterrupted. This was your warning. The voice that delivered it belonged to Commander Halveth Dross, recorded once, never updated. Across neutral colonies, children learned to recognize the transmission's cadence. Refugees from collapsed Concord systems told stories of entire cities that disconnected from orbitals the moment the gate was confirmed on long-range sensors. Entire fleets issued orders to remain in planetary shadow rather than cross near Earth's orbital layer. Inside the gate's command hall, the lights ran on half-draw. Power consumption was minimal. Crew presence had been reduced to a quarter roster. The operation now required no full staff. Beta 6 had disbanded. Their objectives had been completed without a single activated warhead, without an open conflict, without a confrontation beyond structured dismantling. The final mission log declared, status fulfilled. Inside the central vault, a single command key rested in an insulated case, sealed behind reinforced glass. Dross stood in front of it with a small data pad, reviewing the final redundancy check. His reflection on the casing showed lines deeper than before, shoulders set with finality. He tapped the entry prompt once and spoke quietly. Transfer authorization complete. All field systems returned to dormant configuration. Behind him, 2 officers waited. One carried a hard case, the other a data slate marked with a timestamp and a string of authorizations. No instructions for post-hold? The younger one asked. Dross didn't turn. The ship holds its own authority now. It needs no further direction. The officer looked uncertain. And the message? Let it continue. The older officer, Kelndro, adjusted his collar and stepped beside Dross. His gaze never left the viewport, where the arc of Earth remained half-lit, silent behind layered atmosphere. You ever think they'd let you use it? He asked. I wrote the protocol assuming we'd never be allowed to, Dross answered, but we built it for when permission became irrelevant. Dro let out a single exhale. I suppose that happened. It did. Outside, minor conquered vessels drifted near the edge of Obsidian Gate's detection envelope. None entered range. Each pinged civilian charts, adjusted headings, and veered away. Some jettisoned passive comm buoys as gestures of respect or submission. The gate ignored them. Aboard the Conquered Emergency Tribunal on Jaltec 4, a representative floated the suggestion of re-establishing Earth relations under revised terms. The proposal didn't receive a response, not even a motion to vote. Back in the gate's war room, Dross removed the authorization key from the central panel and slid it into the black case. The seal closed with a soft hiss. He set the box into the hands of the transport courier, waiting by the door. Deliver that to Assembly Archive. My authority expires with this transfer. The courier nodded once, clutched the case tighter, and exited without further word. Dross walked toward the forward deck. Each footstep echoed differently now. Lighter traffic, fewer systems online, corridor lights dimmed to long-cycle glow. The ship no longer needed movement to project power. Its stillness had become function. He reached the observation ring, where a single chair overlooked the path between Earth and the fragmented border world. A quiet console blinked with a fresh incoming report. Another conquered outpost had sent encoded civilian greetings under the Terran-fabric courier channel. Dross let it play. The message simply read, requesting entry protocol, not as Concord, just as ourselves. He saved the message and logged no reply. Command staff began offloading over the next cycle. Some returned to Earth. Others chose independent colonies. None stayed. Obsidian Gate would remain stationed, but unmanned except for essential automated systems. It would continue transmitting the single message. It would keep watching. Earth never reactivated its fleets. No invasions followed. No sanctions were issued. There was no celebration. Only continuity. And at the edge of what used to be conquered space, a ship that never fired a shot stood untouched, unchallenged, and untouchable. Not by superiority of arms, but by clarity of consequence. The council room had been stripped bare. No nameplates, no ceremonial banners. Even the central dais, once reserved for the Concord's speaker, had been dismantled. What remained was an empty rotunda sealed beneath transparent shielding. Dust gathered in corners. A security drone passed once every 2 days to confirm no trespassers returned. None ever did. Across the galaxy, the Concord's charter no longer carried legal weight. Member worlds that once operated under unified protocol fragmented into territorial blocks. Some reformed as trade compacts. Others defaulted to internal martial law. Communication grids lost synchronization. Unacknowledged frequencies buzzed with local broadcasts begging for legitimacy from anyone listening. Earth never replied. In the archives of the Arved Defense Academy, a retired military historian keyed a student access file labeled Post-Betrayal Conflict Model. Icarus Response. The opening line read, "Earth did not retaliate, Earth permitted collapse." The analysis detailed how Earth's infrastructure programs, originally introduced under Concord economic integration, became foundational dependencies. The report examined the timeline, 7 cycles from Concord betrayal to structural failure, and assigned no blame, only consequence. A highlighted section noted how no Terran fleet breached Concord borders, no weapon discharged, no treaty violated. The footnote was longer than the analysis itself. This case remains the only recorded collapse of an interstellar power caused entirely through embedded systems logistics and passive psychological escalation. Earth neither conquered nor annexed. It redefined dominance. In a conference hall on Rossari Prime, an independent coalition discussed remanipulating contact with Earth. The vote failed. One delegate refused to debate, stating, "We cannot afford to approach something that made the strongest empire dismantle itself without needing to lift a weapon." Trade between colonies resumed sporadically. Only freighters bearing Earth-registered codes passed through unchallenged. Terran vessels did not ask for docking approval. They delivered their own protocols and enforced them. Cargo was inspected by their own units. No complaints were filed. Earth had no embassies. It sent no diplomats. Inside the Hall of Remembrance in Earth's Central Assembly Complex, a room remained sealed for 2 years after the last Theta 6 briefing. It was opened on the day the official Concord dissolution was logged in Earth's archive network. A brass plaque was mounted beneath a retired operations flag. It read, "They used silence to betray us. We used consequence to answer them." A display cabinet held a single uniform, darkened with age, creased with wear, its rank insignia unchanged. Commander Halveth Dross. Folded next to it was the original Directive Icarus authorization key, encased behind armored glass. A visitor read the tag beneath the exhibit aloud, voice low and steady. Command required no permission, only clarity. A child beside him asked what it meant. The man said nothing, only stared at the casing a little longer before walking away. Earth's Security Council no longer met daily. The crisis had ended not in flames, but in withdrawal. Theta 6's dissolution was formalized quietly. All former members returned to civilian classification. Their names were not publicized. There were no medals. Only archived directives marked completed. Commander Dross was last seen at a transport gate bound for the equatorial quiet zone. No one followed. The man had never asked for recognition, and Earth had never offered it. His work had not been for celebration. In the decades that followed, smaller civilizations adapted fragments of Terran protocol. Repurposed, translated, diluted, but none replicated Icarus. Not because they couldn't, because they didn't understand it. Earth's doctrine wasn't algorithmic. It was behavioral. Its foundation was built on patience, and its execution relied on what other powers could never afford. Silence in response to betrayal, and the discipline to wait for fragility to surface on its own. What Earth did was not called war. It couldn't be. It lacked the elements standard doctrine required: troop movements, weapons discharge, declarations. It had no invasion, no casualties logged. But it ended a galactic order. The Obsidian Gate remained stationary, its orbit unadjusted since the final phase closed. Its beacon continued broadcasting the same message. This was your warning. Many ships passed it now without incident, but none drifted close. In one off-grid diplomatic simulator, a training AI asked a question of its students. If Earth issued no demands, accepted no surrender, and never declared intent, how did it win? The highest-rated answer recorded was 4 words. He never stopped listening. That line was carved into the floor of a war college auditorium 2 systems away. And beneath Earth's skyline, in the old vaults where the contingency keys were once stored, only one data slate remained active. Its interface was locked, not encrypted. Unlocked only by a trigger Earth hoped never arrived again. A clerk logged the final entry into the archive. Obsidian remains idle. All systems normal. Strategic readiness not required. No new protocol recommended. Then he added quietly, almost hesitating, But they all remember. The broadcast never stopped. The gate never moved. Earth never asked for recognition. It never needed to, because history was no longer written by treaties or declarations. It was written by what no one dared repeat. What would you have done if your entire planet was erased through silence instead of war? Would you respond like Earth did? Or collapse like the Concorde? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which kind of HFY story do you want to see next? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss what happens when humans fight back.